Hello SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded. I'll put the links to the previous two parts at the top of the description, and also beneath that you'll find a bunch of links to the entire playlists, but also some related videos. But we were looking at the 360-degree compass, which is divided into 60 minutes and 60 seconds. It is quite old, and we know, well, I covered that in the earlier episodes. And the connection also between 360-degree protractor compass divided into minutes and seconds, just like with time. You know, we know that this is very, very ancient, basically going back to Sumer. So we're looking at the slope angle of a pyramid and how information is embedded in there. And in the last one, I started looking at the corner angle of a pyramid, which is generally overlooked. But they're just like the slope angle with its lovely connections to pi, phi, and some really interesting things. Well, the corner angles have information in there as well. And so 42 degrees and 48 degrees within 0.01 of a degree. So this is what we did in the last episode. And connections to measurement and other information, how it also links to other ancient systems of measurement. But now that brings us back to especially the concept of a 0 point. I put a playlist in there called Unlocking the Pyramids, I think it's called, where I just go through sites, actually not just the pyramids of Giza, the famous ones, but also the lesser known ones and how they connect to Abydos, Thebes, and other ancient sites, including Elephantine, and how that's connected to the Egyptian seasons. And the same angles and plan, it's just really is a standard. It's been consistent through all of Egyptian architecture, from the old to the very last periods of what's considered ancient Egypt. And the important part here is the summer solstice, which is marks the Egyptian New Year. Now, from this 0 point, you would see the profile of the Khafre pyramid, and you would also see the corner of the Great Pyramid. Again, here now the corner angles and why they're relevant. So 42 and 48 degrees. Now I'm rounding that off slightly, because if you use the 7:11 ratio, which is an idealized measurement because each side of a pyramid has a slight variation, it would be 41.099, and that would be 48.01 of a degree. But variations on each side, so that's well within margins of error. But the summer solstice marks the Egyptian New Year, the beginning of a flood season of Arket. We see the old symbol for Arket. Just so happens that the sun sets between two mountains at the beginning of the flood cycle, which was the bread and butter of Egypt. So before the pyramids, before any architecture, the Nile flood and this ebb and flow of the waters the Nile is the spine of Egypt, and the flood cycles were the heartbeat of Egypt. Without the Nile and the flood cycles, no Egypt. So that's why it's so important. And I would say, why do all these ancient sites across Egypt have this connection to these astronomical, also seasonal events? Well, it's the biology of it. Whether before agriculture, this ebb and flow governed the life cycle of hunter-gatherers, and this ebb and flow of the floods in this cycle governed the agricultural cycle. So before anything, the flood is everything in regards to Egypt. And to not include it, well, you're just missing the bigger picture in regards to the importance of this. And this was also prior to the modern age and damming of rivers, and this was pretty much a constant across the earth. The Indus, people on the Danube, people on the Tigris, Euphrates, the flood cycle just was and is and just is the foundation of these civilizations. If you live on a river, all the longest surviving empires, Egypt, Babylon, they're all on rivers. Coastal civilizations don't tend to do so well in the long term. But the Arket season, that's the beginning of there. And so Egypt had 3 seasons. They didn't have spring, summer, autumn, and winter or fall. They had 3 seasons. Arket, the inundation or the flood season. Peret, the growing season. And then Shemu, the dry or harvest season. Each one of these seasons lasted 120 days. and because the sun moves back and forth throughout the year, 120 days would be 37 degrees. So from the new year, the sun will move 37 degrees, give or take a fraction of a degree, because it's not a uniform, sort of speeds up and then slows down. But 37 degrees plus or minus a fraction of a degree would be 120 days from the summer solstice to the end of the flood season. Now, that's interesting because, especially from the 0 point, we see the profile of the Caffrey pyramid, which is at a 3 wide by 2 high ratio. Therefore, the right angle triangle in there would be 36.87 degrees. Again, the Caffrey pyramid has these slight variations, so I'm using the idealistic pure math numbers, but that's essentially 37 degrees if you include the variations. So that angle, which can be found in, for instance, the Osirian temple and temple of Seti in Abydos, is at a 37 degree angle. In Thebes, you'll find it everywhere, this 37 degree angle, along with the angles of the solstice and the equinox cycles as well. It's measurable, it's there, it's just repeated throughout day. So I'll call it a coincidence if you will, but it just so happens that that creates a 3, 4, 5 triangle as well, but that's another one of those geometric coincidences. But so 120 days, the sun will move 37 degrees. That's the same as the right angle triangle based on Caffrey's pyramid slope. So 120 days from the beginning, summer solstice, to the end of the flood season. And we know that the Egyptians, for instance, we have surviving sundials, but also prior to these, back to the coffin text, we know that they were dividing their day into 12 hours of day, 12 hours of night, or 24 hours in total. So therefore, they would have known, surely someone would have worked it out along the way, that 120 days equals 2,880 hours. Each season is 2,880 hours. 288 is just one of these king numbers as well. But so each season, 2,880 hours, defining literally their agriculture depends on it. Prior to agriculture, the biology of the Nile, the flood, the rhythm of life. And so now from, if we go back, so from here we would see the corner of the pyramid, and therefore we would see the corner angle of 42 and 48 degrees. So we did a little bit on 42 in the previous episode. What about 48 degrees? Well, that converts to 2,880 minutes of the compass. Very nice connection there. So the movement of the Earth is basically, it's based on, you know, the heavens and the way the Earth operates, the way the seasons, the biology, the biome is evolved and totally dependent on these cycles. That's a nice connection, but it just so happens that 2,880 minutes, or 48 degrees, is 172,800 seconds of a compass. Now, if you ignore the 2 zeros for the moment, 1728, there you go. But what's interesting about that is, now this is was it the Royal Engineers, and we see Smythe, whose survey also refers to Petrie's survey of the pyramid. Now the pyramid itself sits on the paving stones. These need to be considered, it should never be ignored. And also we have what's called the sockets at the corner. Now this illustration exaggerates the size of the sockets just for illustrative purposes, and it also says so in the plan of sockets magnified to scale. But this would also relate to Shesset and the stretching the cord ceremony, where they talk about where Shesset assists the pharaoh in aligning the temple before construction. She also talks about the cornerstones of there. So what the sockets are, they are the cornerstones of at each corner of the Great Pyramid. Here's a sort of illustration. So the sockets were buried down there, and then the pavement was built on top, and then the pyramid was built above those. So you need to include the pavement, and you need to include the sockle or the paving stones, but you also need to include the sockets. Now what happens with the sockets is the base length of a pyramid is 230.4 meters or 756 feet, give or take a fraction depending on what side. But if you include each side and you include those deviations, what you have is, well, just beautiful stuff comes together. By that I mean, so if we include the sockets, the east side of the pyramid would have a base length, including the socket, of 760.879166 feet. And what's interesting about that is, multiply the base length, including the sockets of the Great Pyramid, times 172,800, or the number of seconds in the 48 degrees. Well, you get that many feet, which converts to that many kilometers. What's nice about that is, that's the equatorial circumference of the Earth. So the base length of the pyramid, including the sockets, multiplied by the number of seconds in 48 degrees, gives you the equatorial circumference of the Earth above 99.9%. And it's also interesting to note, if you include the sockets, the maximum visible base length, so from that corner, so basically you double that. Again, each side is a little bit different, but in simple terms, if you the maximum visible base length equals the speed of the rotational speed of the Earth per second. Seconds, minutes, hours, degrees, minutes, seconds. So time, seasons, size of the Earth, and all these other angles. In the earlier episodes I went into these other ones, so this is the first one you saw. I'll put the links to the previous ones in there and the playlists that go into that much more. There is just an exquisite symphony of coincidence in regards to these measurements, and well, measuring angles, measuring time, measuring length, and how these, call it a coincidence if you will, but at the very least it's one of the most extraordinary coincidences in the universe, I would assume, because, well, yeah, at some point coincidence becomes a plan. What this is contains multiple levels of information. Textbooks in stone, not just the pyramids individually, not just how they work together on the Giza Plateau, but how the other pyramids connect into this, and also other important sites such as the Osirion and Luxor, Karnak Temple, Valley of the Kings, and the Ramesseum, and all those temples down there in Thebes. Again, Elephantine Island way down south in Egypt as well. They just repeat these particular angles and these particular measurements. And Thoth, or Hermes, Sheshet, even Enoch, Ningashida, ancient guides of science and knowledge, guides connected with magic, were also the guides of weights and measures. And this is how you embed information. Language evolves and changes. In my in the years that I've been on Earth, phrases have changed their meaning, words have changed their meaning. What does not change is number and proportion and measurement. These things retain their value and persist as where language changes. Now, even most people familiar with hieroglyphs, well, hieroglyph was a specialized language. It wasn't the common language as well. So language varies. Language is flexible. It's not solid in the way that weights, measures, and proportions are. Now, the movements of the sun and the stars and the moon and the seasons, these are solid. These will repeat. And over time, so slight variations each year, the arrival of the flood, but over time, take the average and, well, it is solid. So the levels of information built into this architecture, please provide a metric for coincidence, because just these last few videos I've uploaded other people who've done work on this as well. It's just phenomenal, the amount of connections. And again, you can't fiddle with numbers. Now you can, take a number, then plus, minus, divide by the number of bricks on the wall, blah, 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 keep going. You can arrive at things, but not throughout this series. And the people who investigate this, they're not involved in numerology. They're involved in it's simple mathematics, really, and simple measurement systems. And so there's, it just seems to have no end. Information built in the pyramids, multiple levels of that, and measurement, weights and measures. It's a thing. Cheers and have a good one.